Welcome to The Explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled you're here today because we're going to dismantle a very common assumption in the corporate world. We're looking at the traditional, purely financial approach to remote compensation. You know the narrative, right? Hey, let's offer remote work, lower the salaries to match the local cost of living, and save the company a ton of money. Honestly, it sounds brilliant on a spreadsheet. But today, we're going to see why designing policies purely for budget efficiency can silently and completely break the very foundation of your team's commitment.
So, let me ask you, are you ready to receive less pay to work remotely? This is a real-world SDTEST poll question that's been asked globally. Just take a second and think about how you'd personally answer that. Now, on the surface, this looks like a straightforward negotiation, right? Flexibility in exchange for cash. But as we're about to uncover, this isn't just a simple math problem for employees, it's actually a massive psychological trap.
Let's dive right into Section 1, the remote pay illusion. To really understand why this trap exists, we have to start by questioning some conventional corporate wisdom. Profit and loss statements are actually hiding a profound operational vulnerability. Here's the core disconnect. The old world assumption is entirely mechanical. It views a company essentially as a machine, a spreadsheet, where action leads to a linear result. Lower pay for a remote role equals budget efficiency. You save 50 grand and boom, end of calculation. But the new world reality? It demands a shift from just looking at actions to looking at psychological profiles. You can't just isolate the action, you have to understand the people experiencing it. Your spreadsheet predicts a saving, sure, but the human system might interpret that exact same move as a direct attack.
Moving on to Section 2, the data of fairness.
Okay, this is where we bring in the hard statistical evidence, and frankly, it's a bit of a shock to the traditional management system. Negative 0.247. This is a specific Pearson correlation derived from 66 participants over in the Netherlands, tested across 3 different languages. It firmly meets the reliability criteria, with a student critical value of 0.2459, even though, to be clear, it doesn't imply strict causation. But what it does show is that a willingness to accept a 10% pay cut for remote work negatively correlates with the blue vMEME, stage and spiral dynamics theory. Now remember, the blue stage is all about structure, order, clear rules, and doing the right thing for a secure reward. A negative correlation means that people anchored in this stability-seeking mindset actively reject this trade-off. It isn't just unappealing to them, it literally violates their core operating system.
And context is absolutely everything here. This brilliantly illustrates what we call a threshold effect. In the Netherlands and France, a smaller 5% pay cut for remote work actually shows a positive correlation for the blue stage. So a small cut is seen as an acceptable, totally fair trade-off for the perk of working from home. But the second you hit that 10% mark in the Netherlands or a 15% cut in Germany, that correlation completely flips to negative. You've crossed an invisible line. It's no longer a fair trade. Statistically, it has become a fairness violation.
Which brings us to Section 3, breaking the contract.
Let's drop below the surface here to understand the psychological mechanisms driving these exact numbers. Why does crossing that threshold matter so much? Because the exact same policy completely splinters across different worldview profiles. Imagine you announce, we're reducing pay for remote roles. To the orange mindset, which is hyper-focused on achievement and optimization, they just see market efficiency being achieved. Makes sense to them. To the green mindset, heavily focused on community, they immediately see it as an inclusion test. Wait, who is getting unfairly excluded by this? But that blue mindset, they see a broken contract. It is one single policy, but 3 entirely different operating logics.
And this splintering creates what we call the prediction gap. This is the systemic failure that happens when leadership adjusts compensation purely based on location or market rates, without actually checking if their team's underlying psychological system recognizes that adjustment as fair. Removing the traditional link between pay and role without replacing it with something reliable creates massive coordination debt. This gap between a spreadsheet's beautifully clean prediction and the messy, actual psychological reality is exactly where flexible work policies collapse. Prediction completely fails when those fairness anchors shift unnoticed. So here is the absolutely crucial point. The blue meme reads pay as a signal of fair exchange. There's a deeply ingrained chain of obligation. Role clarity leads to compensation certainty, which ultimately leads to trust in the system. The mindset is, I do my specific job well and you pay me my specific agreed-upon rate. When you suddenly decouple compensation from the role itself and tie it to some external factor like where someone's house is located, you break a critical link in that chain. The scale tips and the fairness anchor just dissolves.
Let's look at what happens next in Section 4, the butterfly effect.
We have to understand the systemic cascade that triggers when that fairness anchor gets removed. When the contract breaks, you don't usually get some dramatic movie-style screaming match in the hallway. Instead, you get an escalation cascade. Think of it like a stepladder. First, there's just uncertainty about the new rules, but that quickly breeds distrust in leadership. Distrust eventually hardens into disengagement, and finally you hit the worst stage, the silent exit. It's this quiet, devastating drift where an employee is still physically or virtually present, but they have completely checked out.
And the scariest part about this drift? The executive dashboards might still look totally green. But under the hood, when fair exchange stops being that clear signal, loyalty starts migrating away from the company and into informal side channels. Performance metrics begin to blur. Accountability slowly erodes. You literally have managers sitting in meeting rooms, patting themselves on the back, assuming they've just successfully rolled out a modern flexible policy. Meanwhile, their heavily blue-leaning employees are actively experiencing a profound sense of personal betrayal.
So how do we fix this? That's Section 5, Predicting System Collapse.
The answer lies in using technology to make this hidden wiring visible. What you're seeing here is an SD Navigator interface, built using something called AI vibe coding. This is an incredible emerging trend for 2026, where users just instruct large language models like Claude Code or Cursor in natural everyday language to build applications without writing traditional code. By prompting the AI to map vMEME responses to compensation changes, leaders get these amazing interactive threshold sliders. The AI can instantly surface cross-stage patterns that humans totally miss. But a quick caveat, it absolutely requires spiral-literate prompts to avoid first-tier bias. With this, you can literally drag a slider to simulate a policy change and watch how the psychological sensors update in real time.
And we are not just guessing here. This is backed by a computational engine processing over 13,000 correlations gathered globally. It calculates the exact ripple effect of your management actions on psychological sensors across a 1 to 6 month forecast horizon. It takes those qualitative, squishy feelings we talked about, like a sudden spike in fear to 0.60 or a drop in trust to 0.40, and turns the so-called soul of your company into a highly solvable mathematical equation.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 6, the algebra of conscience. This represents an absolute paradigm shift in organizational design. Building on the foundational concepts of mathematician Vladimir Lefebvre, the new goal is no longer just blind, simple cost minimization. As the SDTEST blueprint clearly states, the goal is to build a complex, multi-level decision-making model where transitions actually depend on fears, trust, empathy, and stress. It's about integrating the messy, beautiful reality of human psychology into a rigorous, predictive mathematical framework.
And this fundamentally changes the math of leadership. Let's look at the difference. In old world scoring, financial cost was weighted at 1.0, and employee fear, it was literally weighted at 0. It was completely ignored as an externality. But in the new world math, sure, direct actions and costs still matter at 1.0, but fear carries a massive weight of 0.9. Well-being is weighted at 0.8. So if your new remote policy saves money but spikes fear across your team, your overall stability score actively drops. The math literally proves that a toxic, fear-driven workplace is an objectively inefficient workplace.
So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on. As you look at your own teams, your own policies, and your own spreadsheets, ask yourself, what breaks when fair exchange stops being the shared signal? And, moving forward, how will you design a remote work policy that preserves true human alignment, and not just budget savings? Because as the data clearly shows, if you only optimize for the spreadsheet, you might just break the contract. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.